So welcome to Paper of the Week, and today we're going to be talking about Alzheimer's disease, quite a serious disease. Very serious, in fact. My grandmother passed of Alzheimer's disease, so this is pretty close to home, this one. Yes, she was in her 60s when she developed it, and it was just a progressive decline over years, and eventually passed away about 15 years ago. So Alzheimer's disease is a crippling disease. It just robs people of life. Now, what is it? It is basically a form of dementia, and it was first described by Dr. Alzheimer, of course, about 100 years ago. He was a German physician, and he developed on autopsy, the brains of these individuals had different anatomy, and what he discovered were these little, what he determined, plaques inside the brain. So it's a unique form of dementia. It's not like you're just getting old and you're forgetting stuff, which is fine. Your brain's not working, like your arms aren't working and your eyes aren't working as good as they used to be. This is a specific form of dementia that causes crippling disease. So very, very, very scary, and there is billions of dollars of research to try and address this, because we live in Australia here as an aging population, which means on average we're getting older. And I'm 50, so Alzheimer's comes around about 60 usually, so you've got to be careful of that. Now, one thing we know about Alzheimer's is it occurs more in women than men, and one of the reasons for that is because the hormone testosterone has a protective effect on the brain. And what we discovered with older men that weren't getting Alzheimer's was that there were a specific group of older men were being protected from Alzheimer's, and this is what this paper talks about. And it talks about how these men, group of men, just weren't getting as much Alzheimer's, even though they had the genetic risk factors, which I'll go through in a sec. And what they found was these people were having more sex. And you might think, well, that kind of makes sense. Sex is good for the brain. But when I say these older men were having sex, they were prescribed a drug called Viagra or Cialis. Now, these are drugs which inhibit an enzyme called phosphodiesterase 5. And that enzyme breaks down the nitrous oxide in the penis, which therefore can mean you can maintain an erection longer. And so these men were taking this and being prescribed this for their sex lives. And these men were also getting less Alzheimer's disease. And it's a bit of a wow, so sex is good for the brain. No, it's actually Viagra that's good for the brain, because that enzyme PDE5 also occurs in the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that's affected with Alzheimer's. And what we know, if you inhibit that enzyme, you end up with more of this substance called cyclic GMP. Now, cyclic GMP is a great way to reduce tau proteins and beta amyloid proteins in the brain. So it's a fantastic way of treating it. Now, this graph here, the bottom graph here, which we will put up on screen in a real scientific way, shows that when you take a Tadalafil, which of course is a PDE5 inhibitor or like a Viagra, it actually leads to a reduction of proteins in the brain. So really interesting stuff. So there is a great call for reducing Alzheimer's disease, and if this drug shows to be beneficial, this was only published quite recently, September 2019 was one of a major review. It's been tested before that, but this could be one of the novel agents that can protect against Alzheimer's disease. Now, how do you know you're going to get Alzheimer's disease? Well, there is a genetic testing called apolipoprotein E4, which is a genetic marker, which means you're much more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you're a lot more likely to get it. So don't go jumping off a bridge if you've got that apolipoprotein E4. There is a gene that's quite protective called apolipoprotein E2, and that's quite protective against Alzheimer's. So we know there's some genetic risk factors. Other factors that have a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease are low sex hormone levels. Becoming diabetic is a disease risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, as well as inactivity, being overweight, and also having high levels of a chemical called homocysteine. That's the one that's associated with spina bifida. So you need to be aware that those chemicals are risk factors for Alzheimer's. So what do you do about it? Well, you can't help being female. So I'd advise you to get out there and get healthy and do all the usual things that people watching this will do. But also, and what this paper is talking about, is that it could be, maybe Viagra could be a treatment option, or a longer acting Viagra like Cialis. So I just found that interesting, and I thought that everyone else out there would like to share it. So there's a lot to learn about Alzheimer's, but getting rid of those plaques out of the brain has got to be a good thing. So that's been Paper of the Week, and thank you very much and have a great day.